we expect them to proceed to the first vote in the next half hour or so.
So yes, meanwhile we have two very prestigious guests with us here today. Thank you for joining us. Philippa Hitchen, former Vatican Radio journalist, currently communications officer for the Lutheran World Federation. She was actually the person who saw the white smoke for us on that 13th of March 2013 when Jorge Bergoglio was elected as Pope Francis. And we also have a historian, a church historian, Dr. Donald Prudlow. Did I say that right,
That's
Dr. Prudlow? Welcome and thank you. He will be filling us in with lots of details. Right now, I think the best thing to do would be go to the square, where we have Devon Watkins, who's sassing out the situation. He's been talking to some of the people in the square. Hello, Devon, can you hear us? Perhaps there are some issues with telephone lines because, as you know, the whole of the Vatican has been, I don't know what the right word is, but telecommunications have been under control here, so people may have issues in connecting. Can you hear me, Devin? No. Okay. We will try again. Meanwhile, Chris, what if we go into our first insert? As Chris was explaining, the cardinals are currently in the Sistine Chapel. We've seen the Extra Omnes, everybody out. And we have here a program by Veronica Scaresbrick, who interviewed Monsignor Charlie Burns to tell us all about what actually happens from the moment the cardinals are brought into the chapel, and he's going to walk us through the process of voting, casting the ballots and burning them.
The idea of a smoke signal probably originated because a signal had to be given to the guard on the roof of the Castel Sant'Angelo to fire the cannon to announce to the city of Rome that the new pope was elected, and that way the populace could come over to the piazza. But I think the idea originated there in trying to send, a smoke signal to the chap on the top of Castel Sant'Angelo. Well, I mean, those days have passed. Ringing the bells of St. Peter's is a very appropriate innovation. Before the conclave opens, shall we say, before it actually opens technically, there's a Mass of the Holy Spirit in St. Peter's. The cardinals then go back for lunch, etc., but then return to the Vatican, go to the Pauline Chapel, get into order of precedence, and singing the Veni Creator, they process to the Sistine Chapel. When they're in the Sistine Chapel, the first thing is that the Cardinal Dean will administer the oath, and they swear individually that they will abide by the rules of the Constitution, the Papal Constitution. If they're going to have a ballot, if there's no other business to be discussed, and they agree, all right, we could get on with a ballot, okay, the ballot papers will be distributed by the assistants who are there. And things are made ready that way.
And then this extra omnes.
The Master of Ceremonies will say extra omnes, and everyone who's not involved in the actual election will have to go out, with the exception of himself and the preacher. A special preacher is appointed who will turn the thoughts of the cardinals to the matter that they're about to undertake, and ask them to have nothing else except, Almighty God before them when they come in conscience to vote for a particular candidate. At that stage, the Master of Ceremonies and the preacher come out. The junior cardinal deacon closes the door behind them, And he then will either open or close that door according to the needs of the conclave.
So there really is a closing, physical
Oh,
closing.
there is a physical closing. In the past, it was closed inside and outside. There used to be the guardian of the conclave, who would be Prince Chigi or somebody like that, with the Governor General of Vatican City. He had the obligation of seeing that outside was also closed and the inside was closed. That really appears unnecessary nowadays. I mean, those were marvellous formalities with a lot of history behind them. But I think that from that point of view, the Pope wanted to streamline the conclave.
It's really extraordinary how in this media-conscious society, there's no way that the media can discover what's happening within the conclave. That hasn't changed at all.
That hasn't changed at all, and probably it's better that it shouldn't change, that the total confidentiality, the secrecy of the conclave should be maintained. What goes on inside the conclave, I mean, is nobody's business, shall we say. Only the cardinals know about it. And maybe that's the best way, that we don't see kind of partisan stands, people all going for this candidate or that candidate, someone possibly at the end scraping through with 2/3 majority or 2/3 plus one. Whoever emerges is the Pope. Each cardinal has his own desk in the Sistine Chapel, and normally they'll have 2 or 3 voting slips, rectangular pieces of paper with, in Latin, eligo in summum pontificem, and then the name that you want. I elect as Supreme Pontiff cardinals, or just, it doesn't even say cardinal, just the name that you've to add. Now that's at the top half of the piece of paper, of the rectangular slip. You're only allowed, obviously, to put in 1 ballot paper. So once you've completed your ballot paper with the name written clearly, but if possibly in a kind of disguised form of handwriting, you then fold it rectangularly so that it's now a long, thin slip of paper. And having done this, having completed the compilation of the ballots, the cardinals then proceed to deposit them in a special urn. They come in line of precedence, holding between their thumb and forefinger, holding so that it can be seen, the ballot paper which they have completed. Arriving at the chalice, they place the ballot paper on top of a paten and slip it that way. They don't put their hand into the urn, into the chalice. They slip this from the paten into the chalice, saying at the same time that they swear before God that this is the person whom they wish to elect as Pope. If someone, for instance, let's say has rheumatism and can't move from his place, that's taken care of. One of the scrutineers will go and will take his ballot paper, compiled but closed, and again holding it aloft, will bring it and deposit it in the chalice as all the others have done. If somebody or others are so sick that they can't leave their own quarters in the Domus Sancti Marte, provision is made also for that. That's where the 3 infirmarians come into service. Now, at that stage, they can't leave their own quarters in the Domus Sancti Marte. Provision is made also for that. That's where the 3 infirmarians come into service, so that all the ballot papers inside are all mixed up. He then empties it out onto the table, and at this stage, the count begins. He takes a ballot paper, opens it, reads it, passes it only read to the second scrutineer, who reads the name, who passes it to the third, who reads the name and calls the name out aloud for all to hear, and then takes a needle and thread, and through the word eligo, through the word I elect, he passes the needle and thread through that word, and in that way the ballot papers will not be dispersed. It proceeds like that through all the ballot papers. Let's say that when they count the ballot papers at the beginning, that there's a discrepancy between the number of electors and the number of ballot papers, then immediately that's considered null. They've just got to start all over again. But let's presume that the right number is there and the right number of ballot papers are there, and they go through all that, announcing the name and taking the count. At the end of an inconclusive ballot, they will proceed to the second ballot, keeping on a side table all the original ballots from the first round. They'll go through the second ballot, and the same procedure, look at it, read it, announce it aloud, and thread it on to the other papers. And at the end of that, if it has still been an inconclusive ballot, they take all of these ballot papers, take them to the stove, push in some other material. It used to be straw or something like that. I think they use chemicals now, though, that will produce dense black smoke. The important thing is that if it's only the papers that are being burned, then the smoke is white. Now, that only occurs when there has been a conclusive ballot. When going through the whole thing, they've realised the ballot papers tally with the electors. We've now got a candidate who has achieved 2/3 majority. This is also checked by the tellers, by revisers. They make sure that there's been no mistake made. And at that stage, all right, we're back to the stage where the Dean asks the consent of the elected candidate.
And we never know anything about what happened in these conclaves.
No, strictly speaking, not. The reason being that the Camerlengo is supposed to collect, first of all, any other papers, any other notes that cardinals may have taken. They're supposed to hand them over, and they also are burned. Now, obviously, the scrutineers, they take a very careful note, a very careful record of how the voting has gone. It's not that we lose all record, but those records are then put into a special envelope and put in a very specially assigned archive, not open to consultation.
What happens then?
You've now got a candidate who has been canonically elected. The Cardinal Dean asks him, do you accept your canonical election? And if he accepts it, the Dean asks him, by what name do you wish to be called? What name, pontifical name, do you wish to assume? And the newly elected Pope announces the name that he would like, to be called by. And from that very moment, he is the Bishop of Rome. He is the Pope. He's the head of the College of Bishops.
And we were listening there to a programme produced by Veronica Scaresbrick, who was interviewing Monsignor Charles Burns. He was the ecclesiastical advisor to the British Embassy to the Holy See. He also served as a canon of St. Peter's Basilica, and he continues to be active in Rome, although he's retired from his role in the Vatican archives after 35 years.
And here with us in studio this evening, we have Dr. Donald Prudlow, my friend from very way back. Dr. Prudlow is the Warren Professor of Catholic Studies at the University of Tulsa in Oklahoma in the United States. Dr. Prudlow, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here on this historic occasion.
And you have your academic field is history, and especially medieval history. And maybe you could tell us, the popes haven't always been elected through this very elaborate process of the conclave. Maybe you could say a few words to start us off with the original process for choosing the Bishop of Rome.
It's a very old institution. We're electing the 267th successor of St. Peter. And for the first millennium, the election was largely done by the clergy of Rome, and in very early days by an accession of the people of Rome together. But as time went on, two problems arose around the year 1000, and that was how to provide representation for a church that was rapidly growing throughout Europe and then throughout the world for this very important position. And the second is how to free papal elections from secular domination, from the domination of kings and princes and emperors, and how to make it secure as a religious office.
And that's where we saw the rise of the position of cardinal, which is not a biblical position, it's an ecclesiastical position, and it developed out of the clergy of Rome and still has a connection to the clergy of Rome.
Absolutely. It's critical that the cardinals can trace their lines back to the early, particularly the parishes of Rome, the deaconries of Rome, and that allows them, so when we saw last Sunday all of the cardinals going out to their titular parishes where they're pastors of and saying Mass there and meeting the people in those parishes, technically they are the pastor of that, and as a pastor of the city of Rome, they are entitled by ancient right to elect the Bishop of Rome. But notice what that does is, let's say a bishop from England or a bishop from Germany, from France, the Pope particularly wants them as an advisor, wants to give Germany, France, Italy, Spain a say in the election. He will appoint them as an advisor, a title that came to be assigned with cardinals from cardines, the hinges of the Roman Church, the close associates of the Roman Church. And in this way, through the medieval process of representation was a very important principle in medieval Europe. The entire world has been given an opportunity, a say, in the election of the Roman Pontiff, which is itself such a position of worldwide import. And we saw cardinals today from all over the globe participating in that process.
In fact, that's something that was a particular focus for Pope Francis, who named a number of cardinals from countries that had never had a cardinal before and who now are participating in this conclave. Now, you mentioned, Don, that over the course of the centuries, and especially in what's sometimes known as the Dark Ages, there were problems with the papacy. There was influence from secular and other sources, and they started to begin the process of solidifying the election to ensure the absence of outside interference, also to ensure the spiritual import of the election. Can you talk to us a little bit about the development of the conclave as we know it now, the first conclaves, and how it developed into the current process?
Absolutely. Since Rome is, in a certain sense, the central hub of the wheel of the Church, it's an important position. We know that. We saw the worldwide representation at Pope Francis's funeral, and we see what a significant power that this office can hold. And so that makes it important, that makes it interesting for secular rulers to try to interfere in the selection in order to get a candidate that might be more friendly to their political or earthly interests. And so starting in the 11th century with the purification of the papacy after a dark period, as you say, the election was reserved to the cardinals. And then in the 13th century, after a particularly difficult conclave, in fact, a conclave that lasted almost 3 years in the beautiful city of Viterbo, that resulted in the eventual election of Gregory X, he decided that he was going to sequester the cardinals away, conclave, with a key, in a room, and keep them there until that they had reached their decision. And even this sometimes wasn't enough to get them to make up their minds. The city of Viterbo during that conclave actually put the cardinals on bread and water at one point, and even took the roof off the papal palace where they were meeting so they'd be exposed to the elements in order to, let us say, hasten a decision to get the church a pastor again. Gregory X issued a document called Ubi Periculum, which laid down many of the rules for the conclave that still applies today, described in the program we just heard and in the events that we just witnessed. Now, over the course of the years, that becomes solidified. Particularly, we start to see when the papacy returns to Rome after the Avignon period, the conclave becomes much more settled.
Et ego Virgilio Cardeal do Carmo Da Silva spondeo volveo at Euro.
St. John Lateran, but most of the time starts to be held in 1492 in the Sistine Chapel, where it continues to be held to the present day. The last conclave that was outside the city of Rome was during the Napoleonic period.
Et ego Virgilio Cardeal do Carmo Da Silva spondeo volveo at Euro. Sic me Deus audivat et hac Santa de Evangelia quae manu meatango.
I think the whole world is watching us at this moment, not only Catholics. Don't you think so, Philippa, who we know is part of the Lutheran World Federation? You're here for the conclave. Your delegation will be here What is your perspective on that?
Yes, thank you, Linda. It's good to be back in studio with you again, as we were back in 2013. And as you say, this historic election of a new pope is something that is of interest far beyond the Catholic world. You mentioned, of course, the great interest in the secular world, and I don't think we've ever seen quite so many journalists with you again, as we were back in 2013. And as you say, this historic election of a new pope is something that is of interest far beyond the Catholic world. You mentioned, of course, the great interest in the secular world, and I don't think we've ever seen quite so many journalists with you again, as we were back in 2013. And as you say, this historic election of a new pope is something that is of interest far beyond the Catholic world. You mentioned, of course, the great interest in the secular world, and I don't think we've ever seen quite so many journalists with you again, as we were back in 2013. And as you say, this historic election of a new pope is something that is of interest far beyond the Catholic world. You mentioned, of course, the great interest in the secular world, and I don't think we've ever seen quite so many journalists with you again, as we were back in 2013. And as you say, this historic election of a new pope is something that is of interest far beyond the Catholic world. You mentioned, of course, the great interest in the secular world, and I don't think we've ever seen quite so many journalists with you again, as we were back in 2013.